Good evening, everybody. Maybe somebody is not in our time hour, and so then good day. So today is absolutely unusual talk. Thanks to Professor Victor Fiat, who invited Mэтью Сэмпсон a while ago to his, how to say that, it's seminar, club, or club maybe. He shared with me information about this absolutely unique person. And it's my very big pleasure to present you one of the very few people who decided to risk actually their lives and health and whatever and went to the war in Ukraine, Matthew. And he will first talk about his unique experience. Then we will ask different questions. So respectively, you can think about what kind of questions could you ask, because it's a very rare possibility to be in contact with a real combatant, and especially with real American combatant of this horrible war. So, Matthew, thank you very much for coming, and please unmute yourself. Wait a second. Yeah, you can unmute, and you can. Yeah, now we can hear you. So please, you can start. Mэтью Сэмпсон.
Thank you very much to you, sir, and for all of you for taking the time to join us this afternoon and this evening. I'm on West Coast time, so it's afternoon over here. I'm Mэтью Sэмpson, and I have a total of 729 days in Ukraine since this full-scale invasion. A little bit of background on me. I joined the U.S. military, the Marine Corps in 2005, and I did 5 years active duty from 2005 to 2010. I got to be part of the American nuclear program, helping to protect nuclear weapons, nuclear submarines, stuff like that, before I went down to be stationed in California, 29 Palms with 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, where I did combat deployments to both Iraq and Afghanistan. I spent approximately 7 months in Iraq and about 7 months in Afghanistan. And it is a very unique and interesting experience for me. Growing up as a young child, I started off in the San Francisco area of California. And even as a young child, we were told that Russia might shoot nuclear weapons at us. And as a young child, we had to do drills at school. When the alarm goes off and the bells go off, we have to go and hide under our desks, and the desk might maybe protect us from the nuclear weapons being shot by Russia at us. This is all stuff that my government and my teachers told me, but I never saw any direct evidence of this. It was just what I was told by my government. And I learned after many years that sometimes the government tells us good information and sometimes they tell us wrong information. While I was in in Afghanistan during winter of 2009 and going into 2010, I got to interact with quite a few Afghan locals. And some of those were able to show myself and other Marines picture evidence and other things like that of what the Red Army did while they were there in Afghanistan during the Cold War. And that was really one of the first times that I had physical evidence in front of me showing mass graves, mass executions, women and children being killed by the Russian army when they invaded Afghanistan. So that was really what solidified everything for me of right versus wrong when it comes to Russia and what they are known for doing when they invade a country. Again, that was in 2010. After that, I went back to Iraq as a civilian for a little bit over 2,000 days. It was about 15 deployments over the course of 9 years, and I did security for the US State Department. So doing security for the embassy, for consulates, for diplomats, for VIPs. Some of the people that I helped protect were at the time Vice President Joe Biden, Secretaries Clinton and Kerry, a lot of different folks while I was there because I was there for a long time. I spent most of that time in Baghdad, which is the largest and most fortified embassy in the world. It's over 100 acres. It could hold over 5,000 people on the embassy compound. There's gyms, pools, stores, a bar, all sorts of things that you would need there to survive a long period of time. I spent some of my time in Iraq at the US consulate down in Basra, that's in southern Iraq, over near Kuwait and Iran. And I got to have a different experience and exposure to countries and entities that are directly connected to Russia, interacting with Iranian entities through unofficial meetings. Russia was constantly connected to what was happening in that area and that region. After I did all of that, I did some stuff here in the US for the US government and for private companies. As a program manager for a while of almost 100 employees for a company that was contracted for the Air Force. I got to learn some more stuff, and our primary focus for all of the training that we did was primarily Russia or Soviet related weapons and tactics. Then, by interesting coincidence, my last day of that job was the first day of the full-scale invasion in 2022. I decided very quickly after I heard President Zelensky request the help of anyone and everyone that is willing to come and help in any way, whether it's militarily or in a humanitarian manner, that I really wanted to be part of this. One part that stood out for me was I had no idea what the word Ukraine was, what the country Ukraine was. I did not know anything about Ukraine at all. All I knew is I have a passion to help and serve others, and I know the evil that Russia is known for doing when they invade a country. And I've seen some of it myself and some of the evidence of it, like I said, with my time in Afghanistan. So I felt that this is something that, with my background as a Marine Scout sniper and with all this combat training and experience in my background, that I could do a lot to help in Ukraine. At the time, the Russian army was known to be the second strongest military in the world. So for myself, I decided it would not be very smart of me to just jump in without doing some research first. Thankfully, I got to connect with some other Americans that I worked with formally in Baghdad, Iraq, years and years ago, that were able to give me some information about what was going on and just what the reality of the warfare was. So that way, when I got over there, I could be a little bit more prepared. So I spent some time doing some research with that. I did not rush it. By the time I got over there, I left the US around the middle of May, and I crossed over the border. I walked across from Poland into Ukraine on 27 May in 2022. So I missed the first couple months of the war. From there, I went straight to the GUR, the GOR. That's the Directorate of Intelligence of Ukraine, very similar to the American CIA. They work very closely with the American CIA as well, training and asset sharing, intelligence sharing, stuff like that. And I spent 635 days there for my first time in Ukraine, and almost all of that was under contract with the Ukrainian government, with the GUR, as a commander of one of their special operations teams at the front line. With the way that the war was, I was not always in a commander role. Sometimes I was a sniper. Sometimes I was a secondary medic. Sometimes I was just a guy with a shotgun to shoot down drones, stuff like that. So it was very interesting to see a completely different type of war and warfare of facing an actual army that has a navy, that has an air force, compared to what I experienced in Iraq and Afghanistan. I do not consider one more difficult or more challenging than the other, just very big differences between warfare in Iraq and Afghanistan and warfare in Ukraine against the Russian army. And that's something that, if you like, I can go in more in depth later on today. After my 635 days, I decided that I had done enough at the front lines and that I wanted to use my voice to continue the fight for Ukraine and not use my rifle anymore. Part of that was I was very confident, and still am, that I may be the longest serving US citizen fighting for Ukraine for consecutive days, with my contract being over 600 days in Ukraine without leaving the country or without having any kind of break in the contract. And that was a title that I felt was very important to bring all that information back with that level of authority to the American people, the American voters, and the American lawmakers, knowing that your average American has no understanding of what's going on there whatsoever. And the little bit that they might know is usually stuff that they see on TV, on the news, and they're not always hearing it from Americans that were actually there on the ground for a substantial amount of time. And I felt that that was extremely important. After I came back in 2024, I had a fantastic opportunity to connect with the American Coalition for Ukraine. They do 2 Ukraine action summits per year in Washington, D.C., where they target as many lawmakers as possible in Congress and in the Senate to discuss what's happening and advocate for Ukraine, which includes advocating for specific bills. So at the time, the bill that we were really focused on in April 2024 was the $60 billion aid package. This was extremely important because it had been over 400 days since the last aid package was approved for Ukraine. So the front line was being negatively affected in a very big way because of how long this aid package was taking. So I got to be a part of that. And it was a huge blessing for me to see how some of our political system works here in the United States. That when the Ukraine Action Summit started that April, that bill was not scheduled to be voted on the floor of the House of Representatives. But by the time we left a few days later, not only was it scheduled to be voted on, but in less than a week, it was on the president's desk, ready to be signed into law. So I got to be a very small part of a $60 billion aid package by just sharing my voice and my testimony and my experience of what I saw from the American warfighter perspective at the front lines of Ukraine for all the time I was out there. Since then, I've gone back to Ukraine a couple more times for shorter amounts of time, which gives me my total of 729 days in Ukraine, both fighting with my rifle and fighting with my voice. That gives me an overall total of over 3,000 days in war zones between Ukraine, Iraq, and Afghanistan. So that has provided me a very unique perspective as an American of what's going on there, and my thoughts and my perspectives of how things are there. But now I sent Igor some photos. It's only a few photos, maybe 5 or 6 photos. And I'm going to ask him to show those now, and I'll just briefly talk about those. And then after that, I'll take some questions.
Okay. Could you comment, please, Matthew, each of them?
Yes. So for this one, this was my first combat mission out there. This was August 2022 in the Mykolaiv region of Ukraine. That's me on the right side without a helmet. My first 7 combat engagements with the Russian army, I did not have a helmet. This was not due to corruption. This was due to Ukraine really just didn't have the resources to give everyone what we really needed to go into combat. And it wasn't until a couple months that we were able to find a donor that was willing to purchase a helmet for me, so that way I could have some kind of protection for my head when going into combat. So again, I did about the first 7 combat engagements without any kind of helmet, just because Ukraine just wasn't able to provide something that would actually work for me for what I needed at the time. On the other side, the left side, is an American, a U.S. former Navy SEAL, Dan Swift. He's one of the few Americans that were briefly reported about when they were killed in Ukraine back here in the U.S. And I bring his memory with me. If you're able to see me, I carry some black bands on my wrist, and one of them is for him. And I've talked about him numerous times on TV in the past. And he was killed in Bakhmut with some other folks. But he is a good man, and in the middle was a Ukrainian commander. Next photo, please. This is one of my next combat engagements in the Mykolaiv area. engaging Russians at almost 2.5 kilometers with an American-made Barrett 50 caliber rifle. It's basically the same rifle that I used when I was in the Marine Corps as a scout sniper. We used multiple rifles back then. So this is the same thing, just a newer model of it. All the weapons that I had in Ukraine were brand new out of the box. So it was an example that the aid packages are working. We just need more of them. That when American weapons are being sent to Ukraine, some of them are getting into the hands of Americans, and it helps us do our job better because we are experts on our American weapons. Next photo. This photo is that same day of the previous photo, just it better shows the length and the size of the rifle that I was using. And I hope that better gives you an understanding of how I'm able to reach targets at 2.5 kilometers away. Next photo, please. That's a photo that was very important to me, meant a lot to me. I have it on some of my business cards that, for your average American, it looks like just a photo of some guy standing in the field. But for anyone that has a Ukrainian connection, sees that as a very, very large Ukrainian flag of the blue and the yellow. And that was something that I've been able to share with a lot of folks here in the US. That's down in Kropotnitsky area. There's a university down there. And next photo, please. This is getting close to one of my last combat missions in Ukraine. This would be, I believe, beginning of 2024 in the Zaporizhia area with one of the first shotguns that we received. I was a strong advocate to the Ukrainian military and the GUR, their Directorate of Intelligence of Ukraine, how important shotguns are for combat, especially when fighting drones. It took a long time for them to understand the concept of the shotguns. For us in the American military, we've been using shotguns in warfare since World War I in a huge manner. So for us, in our civilian culture and our military culture, we have shotguns all over the place, and we use them on a regular basis. But over there, it's not a common thing. So it took a lot to get them to actually understand the asset that a shotgun can bring, especially when you're dealing with stuff like drones. And it's something that works good for human targets and moving drone targets. And next photo, please. And this is when I was at the US Capitol in April of 2024 on my way to talk to Congress and provide my testimony, my experience of what's going on. So that way the American lawmakers could hear from a fellow American what's happening and the importance of us continuing this fight of not so much helping a country that most of us have never heard of, but good versus evil, that when Russia invades a country, nothing about it is good or appropriate or legal or humanitarian. And I believe that's my last photo. So at this time, I will open the floor to all you folks for any questions that you have for me.
But also there is your extended resume. Do you want us to read it, or it's impossible?
It would take a long time to read all of that. Feel free to share that around the community. I think it's like 5 pages.
Let me just show the length. If this is a typical military resume, I'm so surprised, and it's very interesting because many people in the audience, I guess everyone made resume 1 or 2 times in their lives in America, and they're very different. But look at this. It's unbelievable how detailed all that is. Maybe it is required.
I spent a lot of time making it shorter, so it was only 4 or 5 pages. It took me a lot of time and a lot of help from resume writing experts to make it as short as it is.
Yes, there is a famous saying about that, well, it's one famous writer said, unfortunately, I didn't have time. That's why I'm writing you a very long letter. Right. Okay, it exactly matches what you just said. Okay. Thank you so much for a short introduction, Matthew. Okay. Now, let me see. So there are some questions. Okay, first. Okay. Questions, there are many questions. Okay. So, Natasha and Sergey, please, go ahead.
Yeah, do you hear me?
Yeah, we
Yes.
hear you.
Yeah. One question is, I don't know really what is so special about shotgun. Can you explain it like in few words? Why?
Absolutely.
Yeah, why it makes
Absolutely.
it effective against drones?
Absolutely. So here in the US, it's common to use shotguns for smaller targets like ducks, birds, geese, maybe even stuff on the ground, maybe squirrels from time to time, anything that's not too far away. Your average shotgun shell is buckshot, and that is 9 small little BBs, 9 little pieces of metal that are round that fly out. So it allows you to have a better chance of hitting something, especially if it's a moving target, compared to pulling the trigger once on a rifle where it's only one projectile coming out. There's also multiple different shells that can be used with shotguns, and one that we also use is called bird shot. It's more common for birds that are maybe a little bit further away, and it's a lot of much smaller pieces of metal, very small. So it could have a lot of these pieces of metal in there. So you pull the trigger one time, and a lot of small metal projectiles come out of this weapon. And all it takes is a few of those to hit a drone, enough to destabilize it so it falls out of the sky.
That's it. Thank you. And the second question, can you talk more about the unit that you were engaged with in Ukraine? What was it, like a foreign legion, or who were your like buddies there in Ukraine?
So it was part of the International Legion. There's two major parts of the International Legion in Ukraine. One is directly under Armed Forces Ukraine, which I have no experience with directly, and the other is under the GUR. So under the GUR, everything we do is special operations. Our units are smaller and more specialized. So most of the people in the unit have multiple jobs in their background. So they're not just infantry. So like myself, as an example, I'm not just infantry, I'm infantry and a scout sniper. And I also have medical in my background as well, and command and control in my background. So we are a force multiplier. And within the unit and within the team is usually less than 20 people, and the unit is made up of multiple teams. And some of those teams are just drone teams where that's all they do. They do not go out. They carry rifles with them just for their own protection, but they don't bring rifles out to shoot at the enemy. They just do drones. We have some teams that do just logistics and supplies. So for my team, it was about 50% Ukrainian and 50% foreign. Out of foreigners, most of the foreigners were Americans. So I got to interact with probably at least 20 or more different nationalities from all over the world that came and gone off of my team, from I think every continent except for Antarctica. So a lot of different languages. Just to name a few, I worked with folks from the United States, Mexico, Colombia, Chile, Peru, Argentina, Canada, the UK, New Zealand, Australia, German, Russian, Spanish, Italian, Estonian, Polish, um, different parts of Africa, just all over the place, Vietnamese, Japanese, Korean. And so our most common language was English, which I'm very thankful for that happens to be the primary language I speak. I'm good at a lot of things, but foreign languages is not something I'm good at all. So I'm very thankful that English was our primary language out there. So that's how we worked. And sometimes we would need translators because the Ukrainians would speak different levels of English. Some spoke very good English, some very little that were learning English, but everyone in that unit is forced to learn English because it's an international unit that has English as the most common language, especially with all the help that we get from NATO and the West. There's more and more legal laws being passed in Ukraine that English is required.
Okay. Thank you. One question more. There's a lot of, I heard of, and everybody actually read about it, about Russian tactics, about these midway attacks. Did you ever witness something like that?
Absolutely, especially at the beginning in 2022, both sides had a lot of learning to do. What I saw was very similar to what I read about for the fight for Stalingrad during World War II, of just sending more and more bodies at the problem, and that was on both sides. Thankfully, the Ukrainian side has a strong NATO and Western influence on it that both it forces the Ukrainians to adapt faster. It also provides some amount of training that helps them actually better adapt faster, and with equipment that helps them adapt faster than the Russians. So the Russians have adapted as well, but not as fast as the Ukrainians have. So for myself, with the three years I've spent there off and on, I've seen very big improvements on especially the Ukrainian side of going from that Soviet style tactics to a more NATO Western style tactics to better preserve life on our side of the fight.
Oh, thank you. It was fascinating listening to you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you. Миша, пожалуйста. Миша, please. I don't understand. Okay. Misha, can you unmute or not? Wait. Now, can you? Yeah. Okay.
All right. Thank you very much.
We hear you, yeah.
Can you hear me? All right.
Yeah.
I just want to ask you, you fought in different places in the world, and when you did the fight in Afghanistan and other places, you were fighting in the U.S. Army. Now the question is, how did you get into Ukraine?
I walked across. For the Americans with an American passport, we don't need any special paperwork. We can just walk across the border. So having only an American passport, I can stay in Ukraine for 90 days out of every 180 days. So that's the same for all U.S. citizens. After I did the research I did, I took a plane from the U.S. to Poland, and then a train to close to the border, a taxi cab, and then walked across the border crossing itself into Ukraine. And on both sides of the border there, from Poland to Ukraine, there's a lot of tents with a lot of different organizations. Red Cross is one of them, a lot of different humanitarian ones. And one of them on the Ukrainian side is the Ukrainian International Legion. That is very brand new. They started this up, I think, within the first week or two of this full-scale invasion. So 4 years ago, this did not exist. Now, keep in mind, France has had a foreign legion for decades and decades, and it's very well organized. Ukraine is still today working on really figuring out how to organize this. So once I went there, then I shared with them what my background was, why I was there, and how I wanted to help out. And they very quickly turned me over to the GUR commanders, because they were looking for folks like me.
Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you very much. But one quick question. When you go somewhere, you need to work and you need to eat. And the question is, what's the deal? I worked in many international organizations, and I, traveled all around the places in good areas and bad areas. Now, in your case, how do you? I'm sorry, I don't want to ask a question. How do you get paid? But the question is, how do you sustain yourself?
It's a fantastic question. And as soon as I left the US and I got into Poland, I started up fundraisers on the internet, mostly advertising them on my Facebook, asking for any and all help I could get. Because at the time, all I knew was that it's volunteers going over to Ukraine. So for me, volunteer usually means there is no pay whatsoever. Once I got there, I found out that in order to legally fight and help, there's illegal ways to do it, but to do it legally, you need to sign a contract with the Ukrainian government. This gives you legal access to the Ukrainian medical system for any injuries or death that you sustain. It also allows them to legally issue you weapons and ammunition. So that is something that when you do that, you get military identification. So this is my Ukrainian military identification. It's all in Ukrainian. And this allows me also to stay in the country longer than the 90 days because I don't have a traditional visa. With that, we get the same pay as the Ukrainian soldier does, which is a very small amount of pay. And for us, approximately 90% of the pay that we receive goes towards the war. For example, most of the safe houses that we live at the front lines, Ukraine does not pay for. We pay for that. And so the team gets together, we pay for that. We pay for the utilities for that, the electric, the heating, the water. We pay for the repairs. Some of the vehicles we pay for, some of the fuel for the vehicles we pay for. Ukraine pays for the weapons and ammunition almost all of the time. And sometimes the gear that we wear in combat, but everything I'm wearing today, Ukraine did not give me. They just do not have the resources, unfortunately. So everything that I'm wearing right now today and everything I'm wearing in the photos that you saw, Ukraine did not give me that stuff. That was stuff that I had to find on my own or purchase myself or see if someone would give it to me or find a donor that would pay for it for me. So for me and my team, on a regular basis, at least once a month, someone is running out of money for food and water. So constantly asking anyone and everyone for any amount of assistance, whether it's $5 or $500 to help us just survive another day, with very basic food and water necessities, amongst many other things.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
You're welcome.
What a reply. What a reply. Igor, please.
Mэтью, you told us you stand in front of politician in Congress, and your testimony was about war, about how you see this war, about Russian army. So before war, as you already said, common understanding, maybe wrong, was Russian army is second army in the world after American army. And probably our congressmen or politician thought this is real one. What changed right now after 3 years of war? Your own opinion and what you think opinion of politician right now?
Or specifically about Russia being the second strongest military in the world, I think that is something that we in the West and many other places, I think we believed too much of the Russian propaganda. I've learned that Russia attempts to do a lot of things and they are bad at most of them. But the Kremlin has been very, very good at their propaganda and disinformation, and they put a lot of money and resources into this asset of theirs. So I think that we just believed something incorrectly for many decades. And once we, those of us that went over to Ukraine actually fought the Russian army, we saw that they're not very good. The corruption is all through the Russian military. So a lot of the stuff doesn't work properly. The weapons and the machinery, the equipment. A lot of the soldiers did not have adequate protection to wear into combat. Some of the soldiers had no idea what was happening, why they were fighting anyone. And some of them were your stereotypical evil type of person, but a lot of them, they're just like us for the most part, that they really, they're just trying to live. And they can either go forward and fight at the front lines, or if they turn around, they get killed by their own people. So I think now, more and more as each day progresses, the average American lawmaker and voter is able to see how much of the Russian military and Navy does not exist anymore. Most of the Black Sea Fleet does not exist anymore. A huge amount of the Russian military does not exist anymore. Just recently, we honored Russia has surpassed over 1 million casualties, and that's a huge number to lose. Whether we like them or don't like them aside, 1 million people to be dead or wounded, that's huge, and that would affect any military of any size. So I think that is something that more and more of the Americans are understanding, that the Russian army is one of the weakest armies in the world, mostly because of just how they do combat and how they conduct their culture.
So, but this, your approach, and it was in two different directions. Our politicians right now can think like this. Oh, Russian army not very strong army, so we don't need to help so much Ukraine because their adversary is not really strong one. So is it possible?
It's possible. Every politician and their office that I spoke to, I've been to Congress twice now, two separate times, April of this year and April of last year. And both times, they all understand that Russia is our enemy. So that part is not in question. However, the politician, their job is to represent their district. So if their district is calling them 100 times saying, please help Ukraine, and they're getting 200 calls that says, please do not help Ukraine, their job is to represent their district. And we know that some of them, I've talked to some of the offices where they're getting hundreds and hundreds of calls from people in their district saying, do not help Ukraine. And my opinion about this, based off of other information that I've had access to, is that that's Russia. Russia is paying people to make phone calls and do the emails and all that stuff to reduce the amount of votes in Congress for helping out Ukraine. So that's a huge part of what's going on. But again, every office that I talked to personally all understood that Russia is our enemy. They just do not always agree on how we should directly fight that enemy. Very similar to what was experienced during the actual Cold War times, which was before I was born, really. But during that time is really, how do we fight this enemy without actually shooting at each other, between the United States and Russia. But again, every office is very eager to do whatever they can legally to reduce the strength of Russia.
Okay, thank you. And last question. You spend so much time on front line. So what your opinion about new Russian soldiers? Because before it was mostly regular army, and right now it's more and more and more volunteers. Of course, it's big money. I understand everything. People so desperate to get some money and risking their life, but mostly this is civilian, and they are not very good ready to combat, not very long learning. What your own opinion about quality of soldiers in Russia between beginning of the war and right now? In what direction it goes?
So there are some units that are better trained and equipped than other units. They have Russian airborne units, very similar to the American airborne units that are, their purpose is to jump out of airplanes with parachutes. And so they usually have better training and better weapons, better equipment. So some of those are some good fighters. I know that almost all of 2023, I was in Bakhmut or right outside of Bakhmut trying to get back in. And we could hear the difference from Wagner fighters and Russian soldiers. That even if you can't see the person, you could hear the difference. That the Wagner forces were much more aggressive, and they sounded like they were better equipped. So they had better equipment, better weapons than the Russian soldiers did. The Russian soldiers would also surrender or make really bad choices because they were legitimately very afraid. And when you're very afraid, you do some really stupid stuff. So we saw that more with the Russian soldiers than we saw with the Wagner folks. I think now we have two different types of low quality soldiers. At the beginning of the war, it was low quality soldiers that maybe were in the army for a long time, but never really got very good training because it's the Russian military and there's corruption everywhere. There's not money to do good training. And now it's a different low quality that they're doing very little training, sometimes almost zero training for these folks, and then giving them a uniform, giving them a weapon, and then forcing them to the front lines. And at that point, they have no choice. Either they go forward and fight us, or they turn around and get killed by their own people. It's the same thing for Russia has kidnapped thousands and thousands of children. And some of those are older, like teenagers. And we know that some of those have been put into the Russian uniform, given Russian weapons, and sent to the front lines. And either we kill them or they turn around and Russians kill them. So it's two different types of low quality.
Okay, and in comparison with Ukraine soldiers, what tendency, in what direction Ukraine soldiers go right now?
So the Ukrainian soldiers that are alive today are a much higher quality soldier. And part of that is because of the amount of influence from NATO forces and Western forces, not just people like me that are next to them, but just the countries that are providing them these Western weapons with Western training, and also forcing the commanders, like the generals, to make better tactical decisions with help from the United States and the UK and other NATO forces. And so that makes a massive difference because we know that Ukraine wants to join NATO. And there's a lot of rules to join NATO. And one of those is your military has to understand and follow NATO tactics. You cannot be doing Soviet style tactics. So you have to show proof that you understand the NATO style of fighting, the Western style of fighting, where every life matters, and that you can't just send 100 soldiers into a problem and then send 100 more, tomorrow and hope the problem goes away. You have to have very good planning to make sure that as many can stay alive as possible, so that way you have more fighters tomorrow and next week and next month.
Okay, thank you, and good luck.
Thank you.
Okay. Grigory, please. Oh, shoot. Sorry. Okay, we hear you.
Okay, are you hearing me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I have daily life question. What about food? First question.
So some of the safe houses that we would stay at would not have stuff like refrigerators or a working stove or oven. So we have no way to cook stuff. So it was interesting for me. This is one of the big differences between fighting in Iraq and Afghanistan, that Kharkiv, for example, I was in Kharkiv in last year fighting at the front. And sometimes we would get back in time to go to a local restaurant and get a burger, get a steak, get tacos, and have a normal dinner. And so that was something that would be common more and more, and it helped me better understand what it must have been like for those that fought in World War II, where there was definitive front lines. And if you go in the opposite direction, you can go to a normal restaurant and have a normal meal during the middle of the war. So there's a lot of times going to restaurants or something like that, because a lot of times it'd just be cheaper and easier that way to have actual food that was prepared and that was not going bad because we don't have refrigeration or a way to cook something. There was other times where there really just wasn't food, and you just spend weeks and weeks with maybe some candy bars or whatever you had donated the previous month, and there really wasn't much food to be had at all. So it is really different. And sometimes the Ukrainian military would share some of their food, and that'd be very basic Slavic food of stuff like vareniki or borscht was all over the place. I don't like borscht at all. But
Okay.
that's very common over there. Stuff like that, buckwheat and stuff. So that was pretty rare that the military would share any of their food with us because they really didn't have enough for themselves either.
Okay, thank you. But from daily life to spirit, please compare spirit, Ukrainian army and American army.
Well, let's see. If we're talking about both gear, food, and just the overall culture, I think with the Americans, we're much more excited, actually excited to go and fight the enemy than what I saw in Ukraine. And so, but we're also provided better food, we're provided better gear. The food that we are given is stuff that has a huge amount of money in research and development to make sure there's a high amount of calories, so that way the person has as much energy as possible physically, which allows them to mentally make better choices, which means that physically they get hurt less, and you have more fighters that can fight tomorrow and next week. And this is something that is missing out of the Ukrainian military completely, that the Ukrainian military all over, including the international forces that are helping as well, are not provided the proper nutrition needed to really fight well. And that is one big difference I noticed compared to the American military and what is, the current Ukrainian military.
Yeah, and I'm very thankful. We are very pleased having you here because your presentation for our audience is unique. Thanks a lot, Matthew.
Thank you.
Thank you, Grigory. Michael, please.
Thank you very much, Matthew. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you very much, Matthew, for what you did and for your conversation with us. I have several questions. One, how did you communicate with Ukrainian soldiers, with local population? What language problems you had to solve for this communication?
So the most complicated problems that we had with translation was a time where I was out at the front lines in the Zaporizhia area, and it was only a few of us going out there. And in order for me to talk to the local commander, I had to ask the question in English, because that's really the only language I know, to an American that knew English and French. And then he would translate into French to a Ukrainian that was French Foreign Legion before this invasion happened. So it'd be me speaking English, then he would speak French to a Ukrainian, and then the Ukrainian would translate it into Ukrainian to the commander. So that way I could have a conversation with the commander, because I was the commander of my forces. So for stuff like that, it could take a long time to have a short conversation, and a lot can be there could be a lot of mistakes with translating a language that many times, and you can get wrong information by accident. And sometimes it's a small problem, sometimes it's a very big problem that gets people killed. Mm-hmm. Other times, there's times where I would have Ukrainians attached to me, Ukrainian forces that really didn't understand English at all, but in the moment, the context is all combat and we can understand each other enough. So when I point to a specific area and I point out in the distance, they understand they need to go to that position and look in that area. And if they see anyone, shoot that person. Mm-hmm. Same thing, if a guy is carrying an RPG and he's following me, then him and I are able to communicate without really using any words. I want you to stay here and I want you to shoot your RPG at that building. that, that's not something that I need to really say in English. We're able to play, in America, we have a game called charades where you're not allowed to speak, but you can move your body and stuff like that. Or I guess you can't say specific words. Either way, within the context, it could be a lot of fun and kind of entertaining. And it's something that I had to do in Iraq and Afghanistan a lot, because a lot of Iraqis and Afghanis, don't speak very good English either. So we have to use context and clues that way to really communicate. But again, within the International Legion, the common language was English that we used, because we had so many different nationalities from all over the world fighting with us. We used English. Also, at times, we know that Russia was able to listen to our radio communications, and we know that almost every Russian does not get taught English. So we know that Ukrainians get taught English in school. And Ukrainians also watch a lot of American movies, listen to American music, TV shows, stuff like that. So a lot of Ukrainians understand some amount of English, where we know that most Russians don't understand English at all. So if they hear English on the radio, then it provides multiple different things for us. First, they're not able to understand what we're talking about. And they will most likely assume, and this is according to some prisoners that we took, that we are American Special Forces, which then makes them more scared than they already were, which means they make more bad decisions that make our job easier most of the time. And sometimes it encourages them to surrender when they hear American English being communicated to them, that a lot of them don't know much about America other than we have a really big, strong military that is capable of a lot of different things. So it could be helpful at the front lines to speak American English for those reasons.
Excuse me, in addition to the question, did you try to use any gadgets like translation gadget on smartphone, auto translation, or it was not possible?
Extremely rarely. So
Okay.
almost all the time, I would have my iPhone with me at the front lines, and I would have internet through like Starlink. Starlink is critical at the front lines, and it's all over. So that helps us out a lot. So sometimes we would use Google Translate for that, but most of the time Google Translate would be used not at the front lines, but further back during meetings and mission planning, stuff like that, if we're not able to translate correctly verbally of what we're trying to discuss.
Okay, sorry, Michael, go ahead.
Another question. You witnessed in Afghanistan and Iraq awful traces, consequences of intrusion of Soviet and Russian army, and comparing with Ukraine war. What do you think about the changes in the character of Russian soldiers, in the character of Russian army? And connected to this question is, did you observe any traces of crimes and atrocities committed by Russian army on Ukrainian territory?
Yes, definitely witnessed some of that. And one of the bigger ones is one that I mentioned already, is we know that they kidnap a lot of children. The known number is almost 20,000. The unknown number is probably hundreds of thousands. And for those that are a little bit older, like older teenagers, maybe 15, 16, something like that, we know we've come across some of the bodies at the front lines where they're wearing Russian uniforms, but then later they get identified as Ukrainians that were kidnapped. So that is definitely a war crime there, to capture a child and then put them in your uniform and then force them to the front lines to be killed by their own people. That is huge. But I also saw a lot of evil stuff in Iraq and especially Afghanistan. There was one time in Afghanistan where everyone understood that no matter the injury, if you come to the Americans with any injury at all, we do whatever we can to help you. And we'll spend a lot of money, a lot of resources to help you with these injuries. So there's one time an older man came in with a wheelbarrow, and he was carrying a that had multiple children's bodies in there, along with children following him, some that were injured. But the ones that were in the wheelbarrow were dead already. And they were maybe anywhere from 5 years old to 12 years old in age, and approximately maybe about 7 children in total between ones that were walking and those that were already dead. And he told us through translators that we killed the children and we wounded the other children by shooting mortars into a position. We keep track of everything that we do, and a lot of what we do is recorded somewhere. So we knew that we did not shoot any mortars that day anywhere in that area. So we knew that he was lying. And as we talked to him more and just witnessed some more evidence about him, we found out more that what it actually was he was teaching the children how to dig holes and in place IEDs, improvised explosive devices, used, that was one of their primary ways that they would kill Americans and coalition forces, is you put a bomb in the ground and you wait for the Americans to come by and then it explodes. That this man was teaching the children how to do that, and the bomb exploded and it killed some of his own children. I think he was an uncle to one of those that was killed, and he was supposed to be babysitting basically the other ones. So that's in the pretty extreme level of evil that I witnessed in Afghanistan. And stuff like that is normal from time to time, because with them, with their culture and their religion and their ideology, death to America is a huge focus to them. The Iranian Congress or parliament has chanted death to America on TV. So even the adult politicians of the country, leading the country, are screaming death to America on TV. So it's just different types of evil that I've experienced in places like Iraq, Afghanistan, and now Ukraine. However, in Ukraine, it's Russian soldiers that are doing this, as following orders from their commanders, compared to in Iraq and Afghanistan, almost all the time it's just insurgents, so no one's really wearing a uniform.
Mm-hmm. And the last question or set of questions. What do you think, what would be, based on your experience, what would be the most likely outcome of this war? And is it possible for any army to defeat the other completely? And additionally, do you think, your personal view, that American politics, the American government helps enough to Ukraine to defend its independence?
Oh, from the little bit that I know as being really a nobody, I understand that there's a lot of things happening geopolitically around the world, between the major countries involved with all this, that folks like you and myself, we will never know all the details of it. But I believe that there is something bigger happening here, and it's for the benefit of the United States and the benefit of Europe and the benefit of Ukraine, and to make Russia as weak as possible. I think I see a lot of similarities between what is happening now and what was happening in the Cold War. And a lot of the Cold War was, how do we make Russia or the Soviet Union weaker without actually shooting at each other? And it took a long time, but we accomplished that. We made the Soviet Union disappear for the most part and completely fall apart, and allowed countries like Estonia and Ukraine and all these other countries to become independent countries. Unfortunately, Ukraine did not adopt the Western culture very well since 1991. So, we have a lot of problems there. But I've gotten to see a huge amount of improvements over the last few years that Ukraine is doing at the government levels and at the military levels, really adopting the Western culture of honor and integrity and doing the right thing, and really fighting the corruption. So as far as what will actually end this, I do not foresee either military being completely destroyed. I know that the Ukrainian military is low on numbers and has been this entire time, but I do not see them getting completely destroyed. I see this being almost something similar to what was experienced when Russia was in Afghanistan for almost a decade. Of America was on the sidelines and helping out do everything we could to kill the Russians without actually shooting Russians ourselves. And we did that for a decade, and most people had no idea that we were doing a huge amount to help fight the Russian army. We were not just fighting them directly ourselves. So I think we had the similar thing happening right now. It's unfortunate for those in Ukraine, whether it's a foreigner like myself that are fighting and dying out there, or Ukrainian civilians and military that are out there fighting and dying on every day. It's unfortunate for them. But I think the bigger picture here is Russia is extremely weak today compared to where they were 4 years ago. And that's huge. And I think that's a huge benefit to the rest of the world.
Do you expect, or are you afraid of nuclear weapons applied by Russia if they feel that they are defeated enough?
I personally am not concerned about Russian nuclear weapons. I'm really only concerned about American nuclear weapons. I was never part of the Russian nuclear program, but I know enough about it to know that they do not put the same amount of money and resources into their programs as we do. When I was in the US military, we still were an active member with the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty with the Russians. And we had Russians come to our nuclear submarine base, and I interacted directly with Russians that were there to inspect our nuclear submarines and our nuclear weapons. And at the time, we were able to send our American inspectors to go and look at their stuff as well. We've sent the United States about 20 years ago, we were sending aid packages to Russia of millions of dollars for their nuclear program to help better secure their nuclear program, so a random person doesn't just steal a Russian nuclear weapon and use it. So I know that we take our program extremely seriously, and Russia does not. For their military, for really anything, there's too much corruption there. So my concern isn't for their nuclear weapons. My concern is for ours, because I know ours works. Ours work really well, and they're extremely accurate. Everything that we do can be done very accurately. And I know our nuclear weapons can hit a target within a few meters. And with a nuclear weapon, it shouldn't matter whether it's a few meters or a few hundred meters, but our technology provides for that. And interestingly enough, we got to see that last month with us dropping bombs on Iran, and with extreme precision within feet, less than meters. We're dropping stuff from 30, 40,000 feet in altitude, and it's landing exactly where we want it to. And we just don't see that with Russian technology. So I'm sure that some of the Russian nuclear weapons, they probably work. Some of them do, but not all of them. I'm pretty confident about that. But I know all of ours works. And I know that I've had reliable information that if anything that's directly connected to the United States is attacked with nuclear weapons, that there would be an extreme amount of violence in return from the United States with our nuclear weapons. So I've heard, for example, that the policy for example, if North Korea launches a nuclear weapon at an American interest, whether that's South Korea or directly to American forces, that our response will be 82 nuclear weapons in response to completely eliminate their nuclear capabilities. So I've heard that from a very reliable source, that if North Korea shoots one, we will shoot 82 in response. So my concern is for the American ones, because I know they work. And if we're going to cross that line, we are going to be very intentional about it. And I think last month of what we did to Iran is a fantastic example of what we are capable of.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I really appreciate your answers, and thank you again for what you stand for. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Victor? Please make your face visible, like change a little bit this direction. No, once more.
Matthew, thank you very much for fighting for the right cause. We appreciate it. Thank you. I have several questions. Number one, you just touched a little bit about Ukrainian army. What is the mood in Ukrainian army and maybe generally population regarding continuation of war? What conditions should be to end the war? What is the mood? This is question number one.
So when I was in Ukraine last was April of this year. I went to the front lines. I talked to civilians in Zaporizhia, in Kyiv. I talked to a member in parliament also in Kyiv. So I interacted with civilians, government, and the military. And most of the military forces I talked to were at the front lines in Zaporizhia area. Some of the military members want to fight for every meter of Ukraine. They are angry that their brothers, their sons, their fathers have been killed in this war, and they want to go all the way back to the borders of 1991. Most that I talked to that were not military, they are very tired. They're tired of the air raids, they're tired of the missiles and the drones, and they would like the war to end very, very soon. For the morale at the front lines, the morale is being affected every time that there's conversation worldwide about peace talks and negotiations and a possible ceasefire. That has a huge negative effect on morale at the front lines. And the example is, if people are talking on TV about a possible ceasefire next month, then the attitude at the front line is, why should I do something dangerous today if we might have a ceasefire next month? Why should I risk myself today or tomorrow if we might have a ceasefire next month? Let's try to survive until next month. So when they get ordered to do something dangerous tomorrow, then their morale is affected in a pretty big negative way, because maybe there might be a ceasefire next month. And as you get closer to that possible ceasefire, which I believe we've already had 2 official ceasefires so far, and Russia violated them both times. But those are good examples where the Ukrainian side was told, hey, we're going to stop shooting tomorrow. So the question becomes, why should I do something dangerous today if we're going to stop shooting tomorrow? And we've seen that across. We saw that during World War I. We saw that during Vietnam. I think we saw that during Korea, where you had a designated ceasefire scheduled. And a lot of the forces would not want to do anything as you got closer to that ceasefire, because everyone really mostly just wants to go home. For the rest, again, they're tired and they're looking forward to the war to be over. A lot of the civilians, I think they're so tired that they don't care where the borders are, mostly because they're just tired of the drones and the missiles. Thankfully, it's up to the government and parliament to really decide what they want to do with these peace talk negotiations. But it seems like there's intention being handled at the geopolitical level to weaken Russia as much as possible before actually fully entering into peace talk negotiations.
Thank you. You puzzled me a little bit when you talked about significantly weakened Russia. We know they put a lot of money, a big portion of budget, into military production. They built huge drone factory, actually factories, several. They producing shells at unbelievable level. They produce a lot of military equipment, much more than before. So when you say weakened, you mean, excuse me, you mean troops are not trained and they are weaker army itself, humans, soldiers, or you mean entire country weakened? But actually, I don't see it. How it's possible?
Sure, good question. So I see it both. That, again, we recently honored over 1 million casualties. So that's 1 million people that are either dead or wounded that are creating a problem for Russia. For those that are wounded, they need to be cared for. to some extent. And we know in Russia that the medical care may not be very good, but there is some amount of medical care. And even if it's left to the families of the injured soldier, then that reduces the capabilities of the entire country when you have all these people that need additional care that they did not have this 4 years ago. There's a good example is the Black Sea Fleet. A huge amount of the Black Sea Fleet is at the bottom of the Black Sea now, where 4 years ago they were floating on top of the Black Sea, and now they've been sunk. They've lost a submarine, they've lost multiple missile cruisers, and you could create a lot of drones in a short amount of time and a lot of ammunition in a short amount of time. It takes a long time to build a submarine. It takes a long time to build a warship. We know that a lot of the tanks, like we've confirmed that some of the tanks that they've sent to the front lines 4 years ago were in museums. But that is how bad the Russian military has been crippled. They're taking stuff from museums and getting it running enough to go get destroyed at the front lines. So the amount of old equipment that we've encountered at the front lines gives us a good indication that they've lost a huge amount of what would be their normal military equipment, that it's been just completely destroyed. And every day, more and more of it is getting destroyed. So it takes a lot of time and a lot of money to build a tank or an armored personnel carrier. And Russia has never been known at producing war equipment in the same quantity or quality as the West. One example, during World War II, the company of Ford, they're producing a medium bomber every 57 minutes during the peak of World War II, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. Every 57 minutes, Ford was producing a new bomber to go and kill Nazis and the Japanese. No one in the world is able to produce anything like that at all. No one's ever come close to that. So we know that with the amount of help that we had to give Russia, even during World War II, we had to give them a huge amount of tanks and weapons and ammunition during World War II to help keep their army alive. From what I've seen, they haven't changed much since World War II. That they needed our help a huge amount back then because they just weren't able to keep their war machine going enough to be relevant. And now I see a lot of the same. That yes, they are getting help from other countries like North Korea and China and Iran with weapons, ammunition, equipment, stuff like that. But it's not the same amount of help that Ukraine is getting. Ukraine is getting substantially more help with weapons, equipment, and ammunition, stuff like that, than the Russian military. And as you get more casualties in warfare of soldiers, it increases your casualties exponentially, because as you get more casualties, it's more and more seasoned veterans that are killed or injured that are then removed from the fight. And those are the ones that you want in the fight. So as those are killed or wounded, then you end up with newer folks that have less training and experience that then get killed that much faster. So it's a problem that continually gets worse and worse and worse as the casualties mount, whereas some of these other problems are not as exponential like that.
Thank you. Last question about drones. Well, that technology is developing pretty quick. I read reports that maybe initial reports that American drones did not perform properly. They actually failed, and only if combined American AI features into Ukrainian hardware, that combination might work. But generally speaking, Ukrainians developed much better drones, well, at least for front line, than Americans. Tell us, please, a little bit about drones. On Russian side too, if compared.
So one thing that's been very interesting about this war, since this full-scale invasion 3 years ago, that again, it's unfortunate for everyone that is there, for the Ukrainian civilians and the military that's there. It is very unfortunate. For the rest of the world, a huge amount of it is very good for us because it allows us to test a lot of our war equipment to see how well it does or does not perform against the Soviet equipment that is more modern day. Because the way Russians use their equipment is not quite the same as the Taliban uses their equipment, or Al Qaeda, and these other forces that America has fought over the last 2 decades. So my team specifically, we've received brand new drones and other pieces of equipment that have never touched a battlefield. And my team, along with others, have been tasked with take it out, use it on your mission, and then afterwards we write a report back to whatever country it came from to tell them what worked and what did not work for this piece of equipment, whether it was a drone or a rifle or something else. And so it's a huge amount of research and development that's happening every single day out there that is making the West and NATO forces much, much stronger every day because of everything that they're learning, which includes the American drones compared to the Ukrainian drones. And for the most part, American drones are usually very expensive, and they're designed to be used for a long period of time and to be used many times, whereas most of the time the drones in Ukraine are designed to be used once. And even not the suicide drones, even the quadcopters, those are, it doesn't really matter if you lose it out there because it only costs you a few $100s, whereas our drones might cost hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars and have a lot of secret equipment on them. So it's just a completely different warfare that's happening. And we have encountered some of the American drone stuff that my team and my unit has used that did not perform very well. It worked in Iraq and Afghanistan pretty well, but not against the Russian army. So it's given the United States an opportunity to learn a huge amount of what the reality of warfare is as warfare has transitioned. And this is something that we saw during World War II for naval forces. We saw the transition of battleships transition as being the primary force you want on the water compared to aircraft carriers, because the aircraft can just do a lot more damage than a battleship could. And it wasn't so much that our battleships were bad. It was just warfare was transitioning to a new style of warfare where the battleship just doesn't make sense anymore. And I think that's kind of where we are now, that the big drones that are designed to be used a huge amount of times is just not the warfare that we experience today. It works against terrorists pretty well and insurgents, and when we need to kill people like bin Laden, or like when we used drones to track what he was doing, and then we sent SEALs to kill him. But we killed Soleimani. He was Iran's number 2. We did that while I was in Iraq. And so we still use drones for that, and it's very effective to assassinate and kill people like that. But just the drone warfare has changed so much. And it's changed a lot just in the last 3 years since I got there. When I first got there, drones were mostly just something flying with a camera, which completely changed warfare if cameras are everywhere compared to, if I can just hide behind a tree and a soldier can't see me, that's a different type of warfare than there's a camera right above me and now I can't hide behind a tree at all. So like as a sniper, for example, my entire job as a sniper almost doesn't exist anymore because you can't do that same type of stuff when there's cameras in the sky. And over the last 3 years now, the drones are dropping grenades, they're dropping small landmines, they're exploding, they're doing all sorts of stuff that just did not exist really 3 years ago. And now we have so much electronic warfare fighting the drones out there that more and more drones are either fiber optic, which means they're physically connected to the pilot. And sometimes those fiber optic lines, I'm told, I think they can be like 12 kilometers long. That as long as the line doesn't get cut by like a tree or something like that, then electronic warfare does nothing to the drone. The drone is fully under the control of the pilot. And as you said, more and more drones are being used with artificial intelligence to where the drone understands what an enemy vehicle looks like and what an enemy tank looks like. And as long as it can see it on its own, again, the electronic warfare can't do anything against it. So the warfare has changed a lot just in the last 3 years since I've been there. It's one of the reasons why I don't fight at the front lines anymore, because the risk has increased so much that I realized that, at least for my value, that I could do a lot more to help Ukraine fight Russia by using my voice and talk about my experience than waiting for a drone to drop a grenade on me.
I see. Thank you. Sorry, one more thing. What is best performing American weapons in Ukraine? Bradleys?
It really depends on. It's kind of like saying, what is the best car? It really depends on how are you going to use it. Same thing, what is the best gun? It really depends on what you're going to use it for. So it depends on the terrain. And so, sometimes a tracked vehicle works a lot better than a wheeled vehicle. And sometimes a wheeled vehicle works better than tracks. The thing with anything that has armor, like Bradleys or tanks or anything that's armored, is when anyone sees an armored vehicle, everyone stops what they're doing and they shoot at it on both sides. So there's been times where me and my team, we have refused to get into armored vehicles because we know that Russia will use a huge amount of resources to destroy the armored vehicle. Whereas if I'm in a Toyota or a Nissan or something like that, then yeah, they might shoot at it a little bit if they can, but they're not going to waste a lot of resources on it. But if they see me in something like a Bradley or an armored personnel carrier or an American MRAP or something like that, they're going to invest a lot of resources to destroy it.
Thank you.
So the Bradley is an excellent weapon, and so is the Abrams tank and stuff like that. But it also it creates a lot. It gets a lot of attention from artillery and enemy tanks and stuff like that. So it could be a little bit terrifying to ride in those sometimes.
Thank you very much.
Thank
You're
you. Vladimir.
I would like to start from thank you very, very much for what you did in this terrible war. Thank you. The first half of my question about military skills was stolen, but I have second half. My second half of question, what is your opinion about human qualities of your brothers in arms? I understand people are very, very different, but I mean your general imagination.
So you're asking about those that I fought alongside with in Ukraine?
Yes. Yes.
So for those that have the opportunity to work with international forces, whether it's Americans or other Western countries, they seem to have a lot more motivation. And that includes those that are inside my team, under my command, Ukrainians and others. And also for me, it's been a little bit fun to jump into a trench with local Ukrainian army, whether they're territorial defense or whatever the unit is. And for them, so sometimes they speak almost no English. I've been in trench lines where one of the Ukrainians is in his early 20s and another Ukrainian is in his 60s. So sometimes they speak good English and sometimes they speak almost no English, but they all understand the word America. And I tell them I'm from California, so they recognize California. I've learned that the average Ukrainian over there, if they say they speak zero English, they will understand America, they'll understand California, Texas, and New York. That those are the three states that they will absolutely always recognize. So even if they don't understand anything, when I say America, California, then for me, it's been fun to see how they react with confusion of why would someone leave California to come to a place like Ukraine and be in a trench with them, to a lot of hope, because their picture of American military may not be very accurate, but the American movies make us look really cool most of the time, and American movies make us look cooler than we really are. And that is something that could definitely help us out on the battlefield when people like that see an American Marine get into a trench with them and they assume that I'm better at my job than I really am, or whatever the case is. That stuff like that has been a lot of fun for me. And in that moment, that might have been all that person needed to fight for another day and to stay alive.
Thank you.
Thank you. Rostislav?
Yes. I apologize. I'm in my pajamas and I'm in my bed, so I'm not turning on that spectacle for you. I don't want to disrespect you.
Sure.
I have a few questions. One question is, the numbers that you're citing, your sources for the numbers, the losses, kidnapped children, etc., primary sources of that are Ukrainian, I'm assuming.
Those sources come from various different places. So I know that Ukrainian intelligence works very closely with American intelligence and British intelligence and a few other countries. So some of that stuff is verified by the Western intelligence. Sometimes it's Western intelligence that's been given to Ukraine to verify on their side. But for like the children, for example, Ukraine has actually provided a list of approximately 19,500 names. So not just a number, but actual almost 20,000 names of Ukrainians that they know to be missing. And most of those, they know this information because they're in orphanages and stuff like that back 4 years ago, before this invasion happened. So that's why we know that they're missing. As far as the other numbers for like the children, for example, Russia has openly said that they have kidnapped 700,000 children. So that's a huge number and a big difference. And we know that Russia lies a lot. So if Ukraine is saying that they have a list of 19,500 of actual names and Russia is saying 700,000, then we know that the real number is probably somewhere in the middle there. That we know that the way the culture is over there, that there's not a lot of record keeping as what we're used to here in the United States. So if Ukraine only has 19,500 names, then there's a strong indication that there's probably a couple 100,000 more that have been kidnapped out there, but their names are just not written down, for example.
Okay. The losses that you had for the Russian army, in your estimation, what is the actual size of the Russian army? But you're saying that they lost 1 million people killed or wounded. What is the actual size of the military?
I have not checked recently, so I do not know. I know that when this invasion happened, myself and many other people that live in this world of knowing military stuff, we thought that this war would be over in less than a month. The U.S. Embassy evacuated a couple of weeks before this full-scale invasion happened, and I've talked to some of those people, and one reason they evacuated is because they were very confident that Ukraine would be part of Russia by the end of March of 2022. So that was some stuff that we all kind of got wrong. And I think part of the reason that didn't happen is the Ukrainian fighting spirit, but also because Russia did not fully invest their entire military to attack and overwhelm Ukraine like they could
I'll make
have.
my question a bit specific. You see, if you look at Russian sources or people commenting on Russian sources, even in the US, like people like Colonel McGregor, for instance, I don't know whether you watched him or any of his interviews on the YouTube, they would say that Russia is not using more than 15% of its fighting force in Ukraine. Moreover, personally, because I have people I know in Russia, Russia does not engage conscripts in this fight. If you know Russian military, there is compulsory service for males, right? And males who do the compulsory service do not go to Ukraine, because from Russia's point of view, it's not a war, it's a special military operation. Only the military that signs professional contract, which they can do, right, once they completed their service, can be sent there. And people who have kids who went for the regular service, right, came back home, they were not pressured to sign it, and they leave as if the war was not happening, right? So if any of those numbers are accurate, like 15% of the fighting force and total size of Russian military, which I think is under 2 million people, how is it possible to have 1 million dead or wounded?
Good question. So a lot of what you just shared is different than what Russian POWs have told us. So I myself have helped capture Russian soldiers, and not for the numbers part that you shared, but as far as the conscripts being over there and a couple other things, that's not what they told us, and that's not information that has been verified through the GUR and SBU and stuff like that. So
your experience is different. That's what you're saying. Okay, I get it.
Correct. Yes.
Another question is that.
And I would say for the numbers for the million, that's numbers that are reported worldwide. So for that to be reported by so many different sources.
Well, President Trump mentioned 1 million people, but then if you listen to somebody like Colonel McGregor, he says this is nonsense. It's an order of magnitude less, right? But then who is right? I don't know. I simply don't know. But Trump did mention 1 million, right? I think as recently as yesterday or maybe even today. And you hear it on CNN all the time. But I have a hard time tying that million to the basic arithmetic of basically the size of the Russian military forces and the fact that they're not using the conscripts. They're only using those people who are either there serving as what's called in Russian contract soldiers, right? Or those whom they're signing up as the contract soldiers. But anyway, I got you. Thank you for this answer. Another question that I have, you see, you are saying that NATO training was not, or rather is not used either on the Russian side or on the Ukrainian side sufficiently. Some anecdotal things I heard from the so-called Ukrainian side is that they're complaining that NATO training is outright useless. And I mean, I don't know whether that's true or not, right? But here is the thing. I think it was summer 2023 offensive that the Ukrainian forces carried out, right? And then the Kursk offensive that, according to Zelensky, involved some 50,000 soldiers plus. That's according to him. I don't know what was the number. They both ended in a disaster. And in Kursk, for example, there was no Russian army concentrated there to meet those people. Russians actually had to spend some time to move forces, kick out the invading force, and now Russians, for all means and purposes, are taking over the Sumy region, which is likely to be the new oblast. They're going to say this is what we want as part of Russia, right? So if NATO tactics are indeed better, why there is a disaster after a disaster every time Ukrainians are trying to stage something? There was an exception early in the war when Ukrainians basically forced Russians to retreat. It wasn't so much Russians fighting as that packing up and leaving, you know, from Kharkov, from Kherson region, where they just packed up and leave, thinking that it's not worthwhile losing any men there. That was a success. But that, unless I'm mistaken, was 2022. But starting from 2022, 2 offensive operations that were supposed to be a success were a disaster. Why did it happen that way?
So that's quite a few questions. So I'll try to touch on as many of them as I can. Kursk was very successful for quite some time, and it wasn't really Russian forces that took Kursk back. It was North Korean forces that took Kursk back. So far, as of April, I don't know about today, but as of April this year, North Korean forces have not done any fighting on Ukrainian sovereign soil, only on Russian sovereign soil. But a huge amount of what became Kursk being really taken by Russian forces was actually done by North Korean forces. And it was thousands and thousands and thousands of North Korean forces that we know were there. And we've taken prisoners, North Korean prisoners from that region also. So there's that part of it. That again, it was very successful for quite some time, and Russia having to move so many of their own forces to support the North Korean forces in Kursk allowing for other operations to be successful in other areas of the front line. And another example I can give for that is at one point, part of my team went to Africa and engaged Russian forces in Africa. And that forced Russia to send more forces to Africa, which meant that there was less Russian forces at the front lines, which allowed Ukrainian to have a few more successes for smaller operations. Operations that a lot of the ones that at least I've been a part of were not stuff that was very big on the news or anything like that. So not very widely publicized. But I know that, again, with like the prisoners that we've captured, definitely some of them were conscripts. Some of those that we've provided medical aid to, but they died anyway, also shared some of that information as well. So, my experience there with within the intelligence community especially has been a little bit different than what I'm hearing you say today.
Okay, but North Koreans are also not trained according to NATO standards. If anything, they're as close to Soviet training as the present-day Russian army is, right? So basically, and moreover, North Korean, according to Russian sources, first of all, they volunteered. I don't know how many thousands were there. I doubt there were 50,000 North Koreans fighting over there, right? But anyway, I mean, I don't know. I'm just not in the military. It's easy to lay on a couch and to kind of say different things, right? But anyway, my last question actually is not very optimistic, and I don't mean any disrespect. Please, first of all, I'm an American. I'm a U.S. citizen, right? And my interest is advancing the U.S. interest. I disagree with you that having this war or trying to weaken Russia is to the U.S. advantage. That's where we disagree, right? However, that does not reflect in any way you did your service for your country, and I thank you for that. That's actually very rare nowadays if you look at young people pretty much anywhere in the world. That being said, if we go to the Iraq war and the Afghanistan war, unless I'm mistaken, over $2 trillion were poured into Afghanistan. The result is a failure and Taliban government is Afghanistan. I don't know how many trillions were poured into Iraq, but the result is that the Iraqi government wants to kick us out. And for several years now, their parliament, I think the first time it was like 5 years ago, so passed a resolution asking the US to leave. We're there not because they want us, but because we can still force them to tolerate us there. That's going to end. They don't want us there, period. Right.
Rostislav, sorry. Let's stop it, by the way. If you have a question, please do.
Yes, my
if
question.
Not, it looks like like propaganda of certain kind. Please, question, or let's just,
I have a question. My question is, do you really see any hope that Ukraine is going to be different? We're going to pour God knows how much money into it, right? And at the end of it, chances are the Ukrainians themselves are not going to want the Americans there because they're going to blame us, Americans, not so much Russians when this is over. Believe me, it'll take a few years, but this is where it's going to be.
So to answer your question on some of that, I know, especially like my time in Iraq, I never met any Iraqis that wanted the U.S. gone. I met a lot of Iraqis that were very angry that the U.S. military left, which is approximately 2014. And after that, it was just a civilian force that was there. Sorry, I should say a diplomatic force. So there was a lot of local Iraqis that wanted the Americans to stay. And I personally never encountered one ever that wanted the U.S. to leave. They just want to live and not get killed by Al-Qaeda forces or their own forces or anything like that. Just live a normal life like your average person does. For Ukraine, we're really not spending that much money on Ukraine. We're sending stuff over there, and some of it is actually a cost savings for us. So some stuff that we're sending over there, some of the stuff that I've touched physically myself, is stuff that has to be disposed of within our Environmental Protection Agency guidelines here in the US. And that can be done when that happens. Sometimes that can be very expensive. So some of that is the cost savings to the United States to send older stuff over to Ukraine, stuff that is still very relevant at the front line, stuff like Stinger missiles, javelins, stuff like that, stuff that is very effective out there. and it allows us to just kind of go through some of our older stockpiles. So we're really not spending too much actual money for anything that's going on in Ukraine in the grand scheme of things. It's not very much. And it's very similar for a lot of other countries as well. A lot of other countries are sending stuff that isn't brand new stuff. It's stuff that's been in storage, but some of it cannot be used very well at the front lines because it's too old or it's missing stuff, hasn't been maintained. But a lot of it can very well be used out at the front lines. So we are definitely experiencing a little bit of both. And myself personally, I've experienced a little bit of both of that. But I know that all the folks that I've encountered within the military, civilians, and government in Ukraine for all the time I spent there. And again, I've only spent 729 days there. Obviously, there are some folks that lived there for huge parts of their lives and then came over to the US or something. So my perception of Ukraine is extremely limited. But they are very happy to adopt a more Western style of government and culture that they see works for countries like Estonia is a really good example that is sovereign and not in fear of the Russian army doing any invasions and stuff like that. And they contribute a huge amount to the world. So the ones that I've interacted with within the government, civilians, and military are very eager to become very strong partners with the U.S. And they're very happy that the U.S. is the biggest partner in this war compared to all the other NATO countries. And so that's been my experience so far. As far as the training, sometimes, for example, if I train someone in NATO-style tactics for 2 months, it doesn't always change if they've been doing a different style of something for 2 or 3 decades. So some of that training might seem like it's not getting the desired effects. And some of that is just lack of time, that sometimes we just don't have the time to spend a year or two doing constant training with the same group of folks. And some of the NATO specific stuff doesn't fully apply to the warfare over there, just like the way I fought in Iraq and Afghanistan had to change to stay alive and fight in Ukraine, because some of those tactics just were not applicable for the battlefields in Ukraine, because stuff like trenches don't exist in Iraq or Afghanistan. So that's just one of the small examples of the troubles that we can have with anything that's training related.
Okay, thank you. Раиса.
Спасибо. Спасибо, говорю.
Good evening. Thank you
Hello.
so much. Thank you so much for this conversation, and thank you so much for being in Ukraine. I'm myself from Kiev, so it's very close to me. I really appreciate you. Also, thank you very much to Igor that he did not interrupt the previous speaker, because he has a very good temper. Okay, congratulations. I have a question about Afghanistan. As you know, a few years ago, Americans came out from Afghanistan and left a lot of weapons and even planes, a lot of weapons. Okay. I need to know your personal opinion. Could it be those military stuff be used Russians against Ukraine, because Russia is in a very good relationship with the current Afghanistan government? Thank you.
Short answer is absolutely. There is that possibility. I know that recently, maybe 2 or 3 months ago, there was video footage online of Russians driving around an American Abrams tank in Ukraine. That was not something that they captured from Afghanistan. That was something that they captured from Ukrainians, where we gave Ukrainians, some of our Abrams tanks. So whether it's coming from a place like Afghanistan or coming from the battlefields of Ukraine, where a piece of equipment was abandoned, or maybe it was disabled a little bit and then abandoned, and then the enemy force takes it and fixes it, both sides are doing that. One of my first major missions, I picked up a very nice Russian rifle that is still somewhat in my possession, but stored in Ukraine. But both sides are doing that very actively, and some of it is very good equipment, and it helps replenish the equipment that you're using. It's also one of the main concerns that myself as a warfighter has when there's discussions about giving Ukraine more F-16s and some of these other American high quality weapons, that we know that there's a chance that just in the act of warfare that it could be captured by Russian forces, and then our enemy has our good and fun equipment like driving around in our Abrams tank. So again, it's definitely a possibility, whether it's coming from Afghanistan or just coming from the battlefield. I would assume that very little of it would be coming from Afghanistan just because of the logistics. Russia has never been known for having very good logistics, really at all. So I think that would not be very cost beneficial for them to be taking stuff out of Afghanistan to be using in Ukraine. That they're probably taking more stuff out of Ukraine to use in Ukraine instead.
Okay, very, very short addition. Is it exist opportunity to destroy this weapon from the side of Americans, if it is very expensive Americans equipment? Is it possible to destroy it if an enemy became in possession of this weapon?
That's something that we tried to do as much as possible, and it was something that was, in my opinion, easy to do in Iraq or Afghanistan, where it's not as easy to do in Ukraine. A lot of the battlefield in Ukraine is fairly equal, our side and their side, where both sides have some amount of drones, both sides have artillery, both sides have some amount of armored equipment, whether it's tanks or something else. Whereas in Iraq or Afghanistan, the enemy didn't have anything in the air whatsoever. Everything that was in the air belonged to the United States or NATO or the coalition forces. So there were times where vehicles and equipment had to be abandoned because it was damaged in combat. And generally for us, it was very easy just to make a phone call to an aircraft or something else to come in and fully destroy that piece of equipment to make sure it wouldn't fall into enemy hands. Unfortunately, that is just not a luxury that we have most of the time in Ukraine, because so much of the battlefield is equal at times. For example, most aircraft do not get very close to the front lines because both sides know that there's man-portable anti-aircraft weapons all over the front line. Stingers and the Soviet equivalent of the Stinger is the Igla, and both of those are very good anti-aircraft pieces of equipment that are small and very easy to transport and very easy to hide. So both sides really put a lot of effort to stay away from the front lines if they can, because there's a high risk of being shot down. And that was just something that we never had that experience in Iraq or Afghanistan.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Okay, yeah, I do not see any questions. I have a couple of questions, more precisely about 20, but don't kind of be too excited. They are very short, I hope, and you can answer quickly. Some of them belong to me, some belong to other people who ask me to ask them. Okay, that's why I will read a couple of things. Did security check take a long time or your credentials were easily verified? I believe you partly answered that question, but maybe if you have add something, so you please. Or it was easy, or it was not easy, like to get there, to get documents, etc., etc.
When I first crossed over into Ukraine in 2022, the border guards spoke very little English, and all they asked me was, well, they asked me something in Ukrainian, and I didn't understand them. So the only thing they asked me in English that I understood was soldier, and I said, yes, soldier. And they pulled me aside and they took my passport for maybe about 3 hours, and then came back, gave me my passport, and then I finished the border crossing. They never checked my bags. it was clear that the bags I had were military bags. My backpack that I was carrying was the same backpack that I used on sniper missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. So it was very clear that I was American military. So it was easy. It just took a few hours. The other two times I've gone back to Ukraine, because I've been there 3 times total, it was much faster. That they ask me why I'm there. I tell them I'm there to do some media stuff, and they don't ask any more questions. They stamp my passport, and I go along my way. Same thing with leaving, and even going through checkpoints within Ukraine. My American passport got me through a lot of checkpoints before I got my Ukrainian military identification papers. So for me, as a U.S. citizen, I had very few problems, and I also noticed that for someone like myself, if I pretend like I'm stupid and I only speak English and I do not try to speak their language, then most of the time they don't want to try to speak my language if they are not very good with English already. Whereas the only times I've had a small amount of problems, like inside Ukraine, is if someone in the group with me speaks Russian or Ukrainian. And then when they can communicate back and forth, then they ask a lot more questions. But when I just speak English and I do not understand what they're saying, then a lot of times they just they'll spend a few seconds and then they'll let me go.
Okay, so generally it was not a big problem. Then in Foreign Legion, who was a commando of that? Did you belong to some Ukrainian part? What was the chain of commands to you and under you, like from Ukrainians or from Americans or from others? How it looked like?
So for my team, which again was less than 20, it was usually under American command amongst the team, and I was one of those commanders. However, no one can do military action without Ukrainian authority inside Ukraine. So I still operate under Ukrainian authority. So I still have to submit all of the information, the mission plan to Ukrainian commanders. Sometimes the Ukrainian commander comes with us, and I'm almost like a second in command, but not really. Just so the Ukrainian there is the one to make sure that we don't break any Ukrainian rules or something like that. And also to use the radio to talk to the other Ukrainian forces. Sometimes you just don't have time to do the translating stuff. But there was many times I did missions where I was the senior person in charge on the battlefield, but again, I was there under Ukrainian permission and Ukrainian authority.
How often did you communicate with your higher kind of officer and the Ukrainian officer while you were in the front line? Or generally it was like more or less permanent situation. You are here, they are there, etc. Or it was everyday communications.
So we communicate every day. And before we go out on a mission, we have a communications plan that includes, for example, the plan might be we have to talk once per hour. So we'll talk at 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, for example. And if we do not communicate for more than 2 hours at all, then they send rescue forces to come and help us. So we go out with that plan already in place. So that way, if maybe we get overrun and we do not have the opportunity to call for help, then if they don't hear from us for more than 2 hours or 3 hours, whatever that plan is, then they send forces out to our last known position to find us. So that is something that we do regularly. So depending on the mission, that plan will be different. So sometimes that plan might be every 4 hours. So every 4 hours, I'm going to call them or they're going to call me to make sure that I'm still alive, to make sure they're still alive, and everything is okay. But we usually had some kind of connection. So most of the time it was through radios. Sometimes it was through signal on the phone using Starlink, because like in the trenches, we would have generators or batteries and Starlink antennas there. So we would have internet there. So that was one part of the warfare that was interesting for me, that I could be on Facebook, checking emails, writing emails, while also sending coordinates on signal for mortars and artillery and tanks to fire, to where I'm killing Russians while I'm also on Facebook. That was something that I had never experienced before.
Right. Was Starlink as crucial as it is described in media, that it was really a very, very big deal for Ukrainian army?
Absolutely, 100%. There's multiple things that have taken place that I believe would have completely changed what we know as Ukraine today if it did not happen that way. And Starlink is one of those. That without Starlink on the front lines, as quickly as it got there, we know that Elon, whether you like the guy or not, Elon got Starlink there very, very quickly after this full-scale invasion. And that was sometimes the only way to communicate at the front lines because everything else was destroyed or everything else was compromised. We know at the very beginning that the Russians were getting reliable access to the cell phone towers. And if you had a SIM card that was a foreign SIM card, for example, they would just shoot a bunch of artillery at that position, wherever that SIM card was. So they were able to track some of that stuff. So yeah, the Starlink, Ukraine may not be Ukraine today if it weren't for Starlink.
Very interesting, very important. You mentioned that your role as a sniper changed during the war, that latest days you almost haven't used that in your practice. Could you comment a little bit? Because what, the targets are disappeared and the trenches from both sides, you didn't find anyone.
Primarily, a big part of that job was it's playing hide and go seek. So if I can hide behind something and keep something between you and myself, then I could do a lot of stuff as long as I'm behind a tree or maybe a small hill or a building or something like that. But when you have cameras above you and around you and sometimes behind you, some of those cameras are thermal. It's very hard to hide from thermal cameras. So thermal means that they just see the warmth from your body. And if you are crawling on the ground, for example, there's a trail of temperature that follows you for a pretty long period of time, depending on the weather and the type of ground that you're crawling on, to where if you have that capability, you go watch exactly where the person was walking or where the person was crawling and then just shoot artillery at wherever that trail stopped, something like that. So that is something that Iraq, Afghanistan, before all the cameras were everywhere, that the role of a sniper was very different. So now long range marksmanship is still happening of shooting people from 2 or 3 kilometers away or something like that. So that's happening, but not in the same manner as a sniper that might crawl out to position and stay there for multiple days and then engage maybe some targets and come back. That it's extremely challenging to do that today compared to 4 or 5 years ago and before.
So does it mean that the current war, like those days, in fact, mainly war of drones, and people are sitting in different ranches on both sides of the front? Mainly those guys, plus of course maybe artillery a little bit or something like that. What is that? Because I read a lot about what people are writing about that, but this is kind of what makes an impression. Is it correct? Like the pilots, drone pilots from both sides, and mainly this is what's going on. Is it your feeling or not?
That is definitely a big part of it, and again, that's one reason why when I left the front line, I did not return back to the front line to engage in combat operations. So when I went to the front line earlier this year, it was not to do combat. It was just get information, do some videos, and find out the truth of what's happening in the moment at the front lines right now. But here I have shrapnel pieces here from the front line. This is artillery and tank shrapnel. That stuff like this is killing less people than the drones are today. Whereas 2022, this was killing more people than drones were. So it's an interesting part of just war history and being a small part of the change of warfare that we're experiencing right now, because it has changed the battlefield completely with all these drones, especially the really cheap ones that only cost maybe a couple $100 to produce. That to get a camera that could go almost anywhere you want along the battlefield lines, that's huge, and that is just not capability that we had before. And yeah, it's changing everything at the front, and it's creating a huge amount of casualties for those that are out there just trying to take the ground or protect the ground.
trenches. I read recently kind of absolutely horrifying report about the real life from Ukrainian side in trenches. And it looks like you experienced that, especially in winter time when it's cold. And so just what is that? How people survive? Is it similar to famous novels of the First World War, but much more dangerous because drones are running around, these kind of things? What is that? Did you really sleep in the frost or in the rain, in mood, etc., etc.? How it looks like?
Yes, absolutely. And also the summertime. So both the winter and the summer, respectively, come with their own respective challenges, especially mentally with the hardship that is there. So I've been telling people for the last 3 years that the trench warfare part of the war is very similar to World War I, except for there's drones and now the artillery is just better than it was in World War I. Other than that, a lot of it, there's a lot of similarities, and it is unfortunate. One of my American Marine teammates that was on my team in Ukraine, he fought in trenches in Kharkiv that as they were improving the trench, digging it a little bit bigger, they found shell casings from Nazi Germany and from Soviet Russia and from the Huns. So the trench that he was in Kharkiv was the same exact trench that was used in World War I, in World War II, and now we are 100 years later fighting over the same piece of dirt again in the same exact trench. So some parts of that are the same. I did learn the Russians make better trenches than the Ukrainians do. So whenever the Ukrainians would capture Russian trenches or Russian-made bunkers, it was a huge upgrade. And this was very similar to the Germans compared to the French or the British during the World Wars, that it was known that the French and British trenches, especially in World War I, were not very good quality. Whereas when you got into the German-made trenches, it was made very, very well with a special level of detail. So that's one of the few things that the Russians are just better at with that stuff. But it comes with a lot of hardships of the cold. I know for myself, I never really liked the cold too much, but after 2 winters at the front line where it was below freezing week after week after week after week, inside and outside, that my body dislikes the cold now even more than it used to. And in the summertime, there's equal hardship. It's just from just something different, that when the lines are moving slowly, but with all the drones and artillery, there can be a lot of dead bodies out at the lines. And especially if it's a position that the Russians were in recently, we know that they booby trap a lot of the dead bodies. So even if it's a dead Russian soldier, the Russians will booby trap that dead Russian soldier with a grenade or a landmine. So when you move the body to check for intelligence, maps, or equipment, something like that, then everything explodes and it hurts, either injures you or kills you also. So that means that sometimes you do not have the time to send your explosive ordnance guys out there to actually properly check all these bodies. So humid summertime in Ukraine with bodies that have been there for weeks and weeks and weeks. Some of the bodies that I saw were 4 times the size that they were supposed to be because they're just bloating and rotting. And the smell is something that I'll never forget ever in my life. And there was parts of the front line where it was mentally extremely hard to be there just because of the smell. And then sometimes when artillery is coming in, it hits one of those bodies, and then you have a bunch of dead body pieces that is, weeks old all over the place. And sometimes it's on you, and now you smell like dead bodies from weeks old. And that was probably, for me, more mentally challenging than dealing with the winter, as much as I have a passionate hate for the cold, for the situation where you have to stay in it. Smelling those bodies for all that time is something that I'll probably never forget.
But in those trenches, did you make something did you dig to sleep under the roof or something, or just slept directly in a trench itself under the sky? How was it, or both ways?
Both ways. It depended on what the intelligence was of the enemy capabilities in that specific area. So, and that affects a lot of what we did for a lot of our mission planning, that as we better understand what the enemy's capabilities are in that area and their resources, then our mission planning will adjust to that. So sometimes, yes, we'd go inside of basically bunkers that were underground or part of the trenches. Sometimes with overhead cover with sandbags or tree branches, sometimes only tree branches, just to hide from the drones. But if they figured out where you were, then the artillery would go through very easy or something like that. At the same time, depending on the situation and the threat level, you would not always want to be in a position like that. You'd want to be somewhere where you could easily move. So that way, if a grenade gets dropped on top of you or very, very close to you, you actually have an opportunity to move away from the grenade before it explodes. Whereas if you're in a small hole, like a bunker or something like that, and a grenade lands on top of you, sometimes it's just a horrible day for you. You know, one of my teammates from a sister team, you know, he had an incendiary grenade, which is like a grenade that's basically on fire, dropped on him, and you know, over 40% of his body was burned just because he could not physically get out of the hole fast enough.
Right. Have you ever seen your enemy close to you, or just on the big? Did you experience anything close to the real fight, like in trenches or in whatever, or you know, like auto guns, this kind of things, or just on a distance?
Sure. Yeah, definitely, especially in Bakhmut, there's times that our side, my team is in an apartment building, and the apartment building right in front of us is held by Russians, and we just take turns shooting at each other all day.
So it was not maybe often, but you've seen them comparatively close, correct?
Yes. Yes.
There is a specific question. Have you ever heard about suicides from the Ukrainian soldiers?
The only suicides that I'm aware of on the battlefield at all are either soldiers that were already injured, and I'm assuming they felt that they could not run or move fast enough from, like, maybe a drone was chasing them or something like that. And so they decided to use a grenade or their rifle to kill themselves. Or if I'm just going off of like video footage where it seems like they were confident they're going to be overrun by enemy forces and they just didn't want to be captured. So in those times, that's the only times that I'm aware of any kind of suicide stuff on both sides, on Ukrainian and Russian side.
Did you make mainly defensive or offensive operations? What generally, if you spent your time, let's say, in those two types of things, how would you describe it? What percentage belongs to this and to that?
Very good question. I would say maybe 70% and 30%. 70% being offensive and 30% being defensive. So for the 30% defensive, normally it was us assisting local commanders to hold some positions if we had credible intelligence that there is a high threat of enemy attacks on those positions, because we can be a good force multiplier. For the 70%, a lot of times my team and I would go out ahead, clear the trenches, the bunkers, the buildings, whatever it is, hold it for a short period of time, and then call for Ukrainian infantry to take the positions. And then, you know, we either go to a new objective to take another position, or we go home for the day.
But how did you do offensive? You should run ahead somehow. Yes, but they kind of fire. How it looks like, really?
So with my unit and my team, we have a lot of resources that your average infantry doesn't. And one of those is night vision. Every single person on the team has night vision capabilities, which it's extremely rare to find Russian or Ukrainian forces that have night vision capabilities. It's not part of the Soviet doctrine to do operations at night, whereas for American and Western doctrine, almost everything a lot of the major stuff we did in Iraq or Afghanistan was all done at nighttime because we knew that the enemy could not see at nighttime. So we would usually not do very much stuff during the day. We just do stuff at night. So that was something that within my units, we would do as much nighttime operation stuff as we possibly could, given the totality of the circumstances. So if we had intelligence that the Russian side did not have very good nighttime capabilities, then we would do more stuff at night, which there's times that we were able to do stuff with almost complete silence and no one even knew that we were there because we were quiet of what we were doing and we could see, and we were the only ones out there that could actually see what was happening because we had good night vision capabilities. And then once there's enough daylight, then we call up the Ukrainian forces to fill those positions, and then we will either stay the day with them or we'll leave as they're coming in to go home or to go to another objective.
So which means it's like it's extremely kind of course, dangerous. I would say heroic or whatever it is to make 70% of offensive. I didn't expect that, by the way. Could you say what was your best day in a war and your worst day in a war? Just kind of, if you can answer that, do it. If not, we can skip.
I had a lot of fun in Bakhmut. Bakhmut was, the most intense fighting probably in all of Europe for almost the last 100 years since World War II. But a lot of fun at the same time. That for your average war fighter, myself included, a lot of times we don't see our job as just going out and killing people. We see our job as something that we spend a lot of our life training to do the job, and it's rare that we get the opportunity to actually do our job. So for everyone else here on the call, that for whatever it is that you do for work or you did for work in the past, I'm going to assume that there's times that you were excited to do your job because you spend so much time preparing for it, and then you had a day where you got to really do your job and you're proud of your work. So there's that type of fun in Bakhmut. So I don't really have a specific day for the positive. I would say for the negative would be the time that the Navy SEAL and one of our Ukrainian Canadians were killed and wounded in Bakhmut. That was kind of a sad day for us. Just because of the way it happened. They did not receive the Ukrainian support that they were supposed to have, which happens a lot at the front lines, unfortunately. And so that's part of what led to them being killed. So that was probably one of my less good days. So, that's what I wear with me. So, that's January of 2023. And again, I spent almost all of 2023 in Bakhmut or outside of Bakhmut trying to get back in.
Uh-huh. Is there a way to count how many people of the enemy people were killed in certain operations? When, let's say, military reports, today we killed 200 people, whatever, how do they know? You, as a person being on the front line, should provide the original source of information. How you provide it? Is it possible, or it's all just from the air? Or combination?
So it's something that we do, especially on the NATO side, and I cannot speak for what Ukraine did prior to this invasion and prior to me being there and stuff like that. But for the NATO side and now for the Ukrainian side, after each mission that we do, we write a report. It's called an after action report, and where we talk about what happened. So it doesn't matter if we were out there for 2 hours or 2 weeks. We write out the report of what happened, and it's a very specific format that has to be followed, and it's a NATO format, and that includes friendly casualties or killed in action and enemy casualties or enemy killed in action. It also includes if there's any POWs, whether we lost people to them or we captured them. So that's all part of our report that we are required to write and send up to the headquarters of command. So we will get together as a team and talk about what happened directly after. So once we get into our safe house where it's safe, then we will all go around the table where everyone talks about what happened. And this includes mistakes. This includes us talking about improvements that we need to make and where you made a mistake or I made a mistake or we all made mistakes or you did a really good job and whatever the case is. And that includes talking about any of the casualties. And that also in that report, we had to write down how much ammunition we use. So it doesn't need to be the exact amount of ammunition, but there needs to be, you need to know if you used a couple hundred rounds or 2 rounds or 0 rounds. And so we even include drones in there. If we killed 5 drones, then we write that in the report that we killed 5 enemy drones. So that's something that we do after every single mission, and so that way you can actually keep track of what's going on. That also is helpful for doing awards, medals, and writing out reports for the medals and stuff like that later on as well. So that's something that is just a normal thing that we do together, and it's required.
Yeah, I understand. It's required. But let's say you are the soldier. So it's very original information. So you made all day like you fight each other. How do you know how many people did you kill from that side? Did you see them? Do you provide the documentary evidence? Or you make just approximations? So ideally, let me say ideally, not that mistakes happen, but ideally, how you can judge that?
So each person, as we're talking about it, as we're putting the report together, each person will answer that exact question. And they will answer the question of, I fully confirm that I killed 5, and I cannot confirm an additional 7. So unconfirmed means I'm not really sure. Like I'm pretty sure I hit the guy. I'm not sure if I killed the guy. Maybe he just has a hole in his leg, and maybe he's just bleeding somewhere, or whatever. Stuff like that, and that can include grenades. So sometimes you throw a grenade and it just hurts some people, but you can't always tell, did it get 5 of them or did it get 2 of them? You're not really sure. They all ran away, whatever the case is. So every person answers that question, and then in the report, then we just add up those numbers and make sure that the numbers make sense in reality. So if the intelligence is that there is only 50 enemy forces, and altogether we come up with, we think we got 75 of them, then, well, that doesn't make any sense. So we'll go around the circle again of how many did you think you actually got, whether it's direct fire with your rifle, with grenades, or calling on the radio for artillery or something like that. And we answer that question very specifically, like 2 confirmed and 3 unconfirmed, and those are going to be 2 separate numbers within that report.
Okay, does it mean that information about our own losses, wounded, killed, etc., are much more reliable because you of course know much better about what happened with your own division or subdivision than what happened on the enemy side? Is it correct? So, or this information has another trouble, that the commander has incentives somehow manipulate with that data as well. Of course, they have incentives to say that I killed many more on other side, but another incentive also exists, like maybe to diminish the number of own losses or whatever. What would you comment? Or generally our data are much more reliable, and sooner or later we will know the truth?
So I would say that our side is much more reliable than the Russian side. On top of that, we know that the Russians lie about a lot of stuff. So, however, everything on the Ukrainian side, I do not trust 100%. That I'm going to assume that when they say that there was 20,000 casualties, probably there was 30 or 40,000 casualties on our side, but it just sounds better when you report that to the public. Also, you have the differences of the cultures. For American culture, there's a specific name attached to every single casualty that some congressman might have to answer to the dead person's mother or something like that. So every single name has an insurance policy and all this stuff to where we know exactly how many people we lost on the American side. That unfortunately just does not fully exist in Ukraine. I think they're kind of in the process of putting that together where there's a little bit more accountability for all that. So there definitely is some manipulation going on where it's not going to be fully accurate number, or maybe numbers that are maybe over exaggerated because there's not a good way to really confirm the amount of those casualties. And when you're reporting back to, especially like the Ukrainian people, if you can provide them a smaller number that provides them more hope, then that's something that the Ukrainian government most likely is doing.
Okay, because I just know, how many years passed since the Second World War, and the figures of the losses are changed sometimes in 2 times and 2.5 times still. So many. This war looks like it goes on our eyes, but my feeling is that still we do not know exactly what's going on because of those problems. Okay. Did you see any traces of corruption or whatever in Ukrainian army? Did you feel, because a lot of materials about corruption and different bad things in Russia. In Ukraine also sometimes people publish something, but your personal feeling, is there, or because what could you comment? How?
Sure. So I know that Ukraine uses the same software tracking system that NATO uses. So when Ukraine receives equipment, for example, whether that's especially like military equipment, weapons, stuff like that, that it's tracked through this software very accurately. Ukraine also knows that, again, it wants to join NATO, and a lot of countries are watching every single thing that Ukraine does, and they are tracking every single cash dollar, every single rifle, every single vehicle. If it's a bigger item, like an F-16, Abrams, the HIMARS, stuff like that, we know that some of that is tracked also with our satellites. So we actually can look exactly where it is right now. So you have that additional tracking. If it's smaller stuff, then it's tracked through that system. In my military identification here, you probably won't be able to read it because it might be a little bit blurry and there's stamps all over the place, but this shows all of the weapons that are issued to me. So right now it shows that I have 5 weapons issued to me, and that's why there's blank spots like over here, for example.
I see.
And if I lose one of these rifles, then like in combat, because sometimes you lose a weapon at the trenches or whatever, then we actually have to write a full report, and there's an investigation with it to make sure that I'm not just stealing American stuff or whatever the case is. So the stuff is being tracked very heavily. The only times where I've seen anything that would be a type of corruption is more of a cultural difference of mentality. And that is the example of, if you make the artillery commander angry, if you insult him maybe on purpose or by mistake, then you do not get artillery support.
Huh. And it happened.
Oh, yes, it's happened. So it doesn't matter. The artillery commander does not care how many foreigners get killed, how many Ukrainians get killed. No one cares if Russia had a successful operation because we did not have artillery support. No one cares. That part of accountability does not really exist. Whereas on the NATO Western side, fighting in Iraq or Afghanistan, even if it's a completely different country, but we're working together as coalition forces, that doesn't exist. One commander refusing to support another commander due to a personal insult, that just does not exist. The thought process does not exist. The thought process that we have is, how do we all work together and share information so we could kill all of them so we could all go home, hopefully tomorrow? That is the thought process that we have on the Western side. In Ukraine, that's just not there. So the value of life is not as valuable, unfortunately, as it is for the West. So again, it's happened numerous times where an artillery commander just doesn't like the people on the ground, and he just won't. And there's no accountability for that. So like, that person is not going to get in trouble. He's not going to be reprimanded. He's not going to get demoted. Nobody cares. That is an area where there is slow improvement happening.
Okay. But did you experience the wrong decision from commanders, really wrong, which you're against of, but you cannot do anything?
Yeah, so one operation that we did is one of my larger operations back in 2022, and it included, we used boats to go down a river about 1 kilometer. We had an operation. We took Russian prisoners. The Russian prisoners got out with the boats. A couple of the boats got damaged a little bit from Russian artillery. And then it was me, my team out there. We no longer had a way to have a medevac for any other casualties we might sustain. So we decided to cancel the mission where we were. And we said, hey, we need to go home until we could figure out how we deal with casualties. And the response that we got was from the boat people was, sorry, it's too dangerous. We're not going to come and get you. So our choice was either to stay there and die, waiting for just the Russian artillery and tanks. And, some of their stuff is very accurate. Sometimes they're bad at warfare. Sometimes they're very good. But I've had some of those tank rounds land within 7 meters of me, very, very close. And I'm surprised I'm alive. Or the other option was we just had to swim down the river for a kilometer while also being shot up by artillery by ourselves. And that's what we ended up doing. And that was one of those times where it was kind of a funny situation because it was such a horrible situation. It could not get any worse. So it also couldn't really get any better. But it was just one of those situations where, we just all look stupid because we're swimming down a river for a kilometer with all of our stuff and our casualties. And while the Russians are still shooting at us and the Ukrainians refuse to come and get us because they said war is dangerous.
Very interesting. Right. Did you feel yourself the lack of help from US? Because in the press, usually it's discussed the very big question, how much was delivered, how much was not, etc. On the front lines, how did you feel that? Or personally, your group, yourself felt that it's okay, I'm armed, etc., etc. Or you felt the differences in delivery from America or from Europe, these kind of things?
So as far as the aid packages, my unit got a lot of cool stuff out of the aid packages, good weapons, good equipment, stuff like that for when the aid package would arrive. And that's a small part of the corruption that is beneficial, that my higher commander is very well connected within Ukrainian military and government. So when something nice arrives, he was one of the first ones to get the nice stuff. And sometimes we use the nice stuff and sometimes we never used it. But it was nice to have it, but it would have been better if someone else had it instead. So that was one of the positives and negatives of just where the culture is. As far as Americans, I noticed a lot. I could really only speak on my interaction directly with Americans. So talking to them in person, talking to them on Facebook or something like that. So I'm talking to the voters, not like the lawmakers in this context. And I'd say probably 80% of them just could not comprehend the difference of warfare. So the war in Ukraine is 100% crowdfunded. So from the top, it's crowdfunded from governments giving millions or billions of dollars of weapons and equipment and supplies. And from the bottom, it's people like me that have a fundraiser of, please give me $5, I could buy food tomorrow, stuff like that. That has never really happened in the United States since the Revolutionary War back in the 1700s, where every little dollar mattered. So for your average American, I talked to Americans where I've explained it 5 times of the US government does not pay me to be in Ukraine. I am not part of the US government. I'm just a private citizen. And it's not that they did not believe me, they just did not understand it. And another example is in Ukraine, sometimes if the military vehicle, like the tank, needs to be fixed, you fundraise and you fix it yourself because Ukraine just doesn't have the resources to fix it quickly. And that's not a corruption issue, that's just a resources issue. In the US military, I'm not allowed to fix the vehicle if I'm not trained to do it. And I'm not allowed to spend my own money to fix the vehicle. I have to use the helmet that the US government gives me. I have to use the weapon that the US government gives me. I can't go and buy my own stuff or for stuff like that. So that's something that your average American most of them don't comprehend, that a soldier would be asking other people to chip in $5 or $50 to buy something for the war, because that would never, ever, ever happen with the US military. The US military gives the soldier or the Marine everything because it's a liability issue that congressmen could lose their jobs if I don't have all the stuff I need when I go to Iraq or Afghanistan when I'm wearing the American uniform for the United States of America. Whereas that's just not how it is in Ukraine. So again, your average American just doesn't comprehend that the U.S. government is not supporting me, Matthew Sampson, directly.
It's horrible to hear that. Does it mean that okay, you are the exception, you are American and Ukrainian soil, etc. But it means at the same time that Ukrainian soldiers are not provided even with food normally, correct? With ammunition normally. If you have to pay your own money, what about them? Is it the same? Like they starving there in trenches mainly, or how it works?
So again, I said I run my own fundraisers. Most units across the entirety of Ukraine, foreign and Ukrainian, run their own fundraisers. So almost everyone is asking for help, for any amount of money. And I constantly see on like Facebook, for example, of Ukrainians in Ukraine, sharing around the bank card number for a fundraiser for someone needs boots or a helmet or night vision or a drone or tires for the vehicles, something like that. And that's across the entirety of Ukraine's forces, the international forces, and the Ukrainian armed forces themselves. So that's part where I'd say probably 80% of your average American just doesn't comprehend that. It's not that they don't believe it. They just don't understand it because it's not part of our culture. And maybe 10% might understand it and they fully disagree with supporting Ukraine at all. And then the other 10%, understands it very well and they're doing everything they can to help out. But the 80%, they just don't understand that the entire warfare, every single dollar matters for this war.
I understood that up to a certain point before our talk. I've sent many times money to this, to that. It's understandable. But to hear that it has like such a wide, distribution that everybody needs. So which means the state is not able to provide soldiers with minimal things. Is it correct?
A lot of times correct. And from my perspective, for the most part, it's not a major corruption issue. It's just a lack of resources.
Right.
So if there is corruption, it's corruption in the past that we are now suffering from today, that the Ukrainian military was not properly funded 10 years ago, 5 years ago, 15 years ago, to where now, the last 3 years, we have a lot of problems because of prior corruption that may have been allowed just due to the culture. But a big part of it today is suffering from that and just an absence of resources, where when the resources do come in from other countries, as far as I know, they're not just sitting around in warehouses. They're getting to the front lines very quickly, and then we use them however we need to. But every little bit of assistance helps, whether it's someone sending a few dollars or someone sending equipment or government sending ammunition.
But how, sitting in the trench, can you even dispose your dollars? You have dollars, but you don't have food. How to exchange your money to food? Would somebody deliver that? How it works? Like in the Second World War, there were special, like cooks who bring something. Now they do not do it because of drones or something like that. How you manage? You take everything as a dry food and then prepare yourself in bunkers or in trenches. This is how it works. So you have to carry with you a hell of a lot of things for 10 days, for example. As a tourist, I can imagine that. Like,
so for myself and my guys, food is included in all the mission planning. So if we know that we're going to be out there for 3 days, then the instructions are you need to bring at least 3 days worth of food plus a little bit extra, because sometimes 3 days turns into 5 days.
Right.
And water is always the priority. Your body needs water more than it needs food. As far as basic survival, you operate better with both food and both water and good quality food, but to remain alive, you had to have water. So the water is the paramount priority. But most of the missions I did, we would stop at the gas station, a working gas station like an OCO, for those that have spent time over there, an OCO or something similar, and buy hot dogs, energy drinks, candy bars, jerky, monsters, stuff like that. And, we go out there with our pockets and our backpack full of the stuff that we, sometimes fresh coffee for those that drink coffee. That's what you go out to the mission with. And then a lot of times we stop at the same gas station on the way back to get more food. So that's something that I never did before with Iraq or Afghanistan, where you just stop at a local gas station on the way to go fight an army. That's not something that existed back during Iraq or Afghanistan. So the short answer is, each individual generally is required to carry their food and water for themselves, and then we share sometimes if needed.
Individual, not the group, not the commander. So this is unbelievable. Like you go 10 people or 20 people and everybody should equip himself. It's kind of wow.
And sometimes we would get some support from the command through our supply and logistics teams, where they might have MREs, meals that are ready to eat, which is what's common in the US military and the Western militaries. So sometimes we would have stuff like that. Sometimes they would just run out, and instructions are, make sure you have food, and that's it. So hopefully you have money, whether it's money that Ukraine paid you or you're fundraising, and you maybe go to the grocery store and get some stuff to carry with you, or you just don't eat, whatever.
You mentioned that, let's say, 3 days operation or whatever. Does it mean that you regularly change? Like you go to the front line for 3 or 5 days, then you come back? Because a lot of times I saw the reports that people are sitting there for very many days, like a month or even more, without any, any rotation.
There's always, every place that I've been to, and the region that I've been to and I fought in are Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Mykolaiv, and Donetsk. And Donetsk was mostly Bakhmut. So I've been to almost every region at the front lines. And there's always some amount of rotation, even if the soldier is not going all the way back to a safe house or to a city. There's some amount of rotation to at least come off the line enough to go to sleep for a little while, where it's someone else's job to watch while your job is to sleep for maybe an hour, maybe it's 6 hours. Each unit does it a little bit differently. So sometimes for us, sometimes we would go out for 24 hours. Sometimes we would go out for 72 hours, where, we're out there on the front lines for the full 72 hours. But within ourselves, we set up a rotation where it's my turn to sleep and my job is to sleep for the next 4 hours, and he's going to watch for the next 4 hours, and then we switch. And then if something important happens, then we all wake up and deal with whatever is happening.
So certain kind of rotation existed. Okay. The sleeping. So my personal experience from the serving in the Soviet Army was that it was two main things were kind of around: how to eat and how to sleep. Just two main things. So how do you sleep? Like during the night, or you do in a mode like you mentioned, like 4 hours, like this. It was typical for the front line?
Correct. So normally if it's like a 2 hour or 4 hour rotation, it doesn't matter what the sun is doing, whether the sun is up or the sun is down, that part doesn't matter. If you're in the position and the plan is to remain in that position for the next 3 days, then you just set up that sleep rotation amongst yourselves, and you sleep as much as you can during your time where it's not your job to be watching, whether that's watching the radio, whether that's watching the lines, or watching the drone footage, whatever the case is.
Okay. It was a request, which let me just repeat. Could you please send me, I would send all others, the websites of the like units of military units which we rely on, that they could be helped. Like we can send donations to those guys under your recommendation, because there are many, in that donation stuff, thousands of places ask for donation, but you never know how it really goes. So after your recommendation, I guess people would send them with a big pleasure. Is it possible?
So really the only unit that I have good experience with is the unit that I was in for all that time. And the last time I saw the unit in person was April when I was at the front lines, and they were at the front lines also. A lot of the unit is not the same today as it was back when I was fighting with that unit back in 2024. So, it changes a lot, whether people get killed, injured, or just decide it's time to go home. So I don't have a list of units that I'd recommend. I have just the one, and I'm not sure if that unit itself has a fundraising page. I always ran, like right now, I have 2 active fundraisers that are basically for the same thing, that helps me just do more advocacy work and helps me do more traveling. So, for example, last month when I met Dr. Fett was, me getting money together so I could travel to West Virginia to do that event. And when I go to like Congress, in Washington D.C., that stuff that all that takes money. So that's where I do the fundraising for myself, and that's the way that I help. As far as the specific unit, if I receive like any donations that specifically come with a note of, hey, I want this to go to someone at the front, then I could probably forward that along. Otherwise, that can be a little bit more challenging.
Okay, is it the site which is called Sovereign Sampson or something?
Yeah, so that is my website, and one of my fundraisers is listed on that website.
You didn't give it to me, or maybe I missed it. I don't remember. Okay, if you please resend it to me again,
Sure.
I will distribute. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Okay, so Matthew, thanks a lot. It's not enough to say. So everybody is impressed. I'm personally like how you did that, how you mentally, did all that stuff. It's really heroic behavior and from very poor considerations. Thank you so much.
I do want to touch on, I see that one question did come across in the chat that's asking if I plan to rejoin the U.S. military or get a teaching position within the U.S. military.
Yes, I missed it, yeah.
And to touch on that, the short answer is no. I did my 5 years active duty from 2005 to 2010. So I just recently celebrated my 20-year anniversary of joining the U.S. military. I've survived 3 wars. That's enough for me. I'm considered by the U.S. government a disabled veteran now because I have a lot of health problems because of me going to 3 different wars, most of it from Iraq and Afghanistan, and all the time I spent there, but additional stuff from Ukraine. So I've done enough when it comes to that stuff. My focus now is to continue to fight, just use my voice instead. And so far, with me using the $60 billion aid package as a good example for last year, that I just got to be even a small part of that. I was one of over 500 people that was there talking to Congress, but I was the only one fresh off the front lines that had my unique perspective. That is something that I see, that my voice there, $60 billion does more to help the Ukrainian nation and the Ukrainian people than anything I've ever done at the front lines with my rifle, ever. So
you're right. It looks like great decision. And yes, you're right. Your unique experience could be extremely helpful. Okay, if you saw in a chat maybe some other unanswered questions you can answer, maybe you can quickly check, because while I'm talking, I do not look at the chat, but you can quickly check yourself.
I don't see anything else. There's only one that is not in English, so I don't fully understand what it says. But other than that, that looks like the only question that was missed.
Matthew, it's hard to express our gratitude to you for your time, for your service, of course, mainly, but also for your time spent with us and explaining the rough truths of what's going on over there. So it's extremely helpful. Everybody here is involved in that war very tightly. Many people have relatives there or friends or whatever. Everybody follows the news in Ukrainian or mainly in Russian and in English. but such a life experience like you brought is uncomparable with anything else. So thank you so much for that, and just let wish that your new life, kind of, as you said, voice instead of rifle, would be as successful as it was the first one over there in Ukraine.
Thank you very much. And I appreciate you setting all this up and all of you being a part of this and including the questions that were including disagreements about my perspective. I really appreciate all of that. And I appreciate all of you really exercising your freedoms as citizens to express all your opinions and your questions, whether we agree or not. That part doesn't matter to me. But I'm just happy that you guys are expressing the freedoms that I've provided to you. And that's really awesome and encouraging to me.
Thank you very much, Mэтью. Thank you very much. Okay, so I guess everybody is grateful, and let's see how it goes on. Bye-bye, and let's meet next time. Thank you.
So thank you very much.